Welcome to the first webinar we're hosting at Genius, and it's also the first in a series. Our intention is to organize these sessions more often as a place to share experiences, insights, and challenges from the media and entertainment production world. Let me be very clear from the start. This is definitely not a product demo. Of course, if after this session you'd like to see Genius in action, we'll be more than happy to show it to you. But today is about something. These webinars are aimed at everyone working in audiovisual, media, and entertainment production. What we want to do is share what we encounter in the market every day and what we see happening at our customers. To create a space where we can reflect together on how production really works today and how it potentially could work better. Today we'll focus on one very concrete challenge: how managing process flows and workflows often consumes an enormous amount of time and energy. Time and efficiency that slowly leaks away from what teams actually want to spend it on, and that's creative work. Before we continue, one practical note. If questions come up while you're watching, please use the chat. We'll collect them and come back to them at the end of the session. My name is Ivan Dreslaars. I'm one of the founders of Genius and currently taking up the role of Chief Innovation Officer. Genius has been around for many years, working closely with broadcasters, production companies, and media organizations across different countries and formats. We see how different organizations approach planning, budgeting, resource management, and collaboration. And we see the patterns that repeat themselves. That perspective is what we want to share with you today. The production world has changed dramatically. New formats appear constantly. What used to be experimental is now part of everyday production. At the same time, platforms evolve rapidly. Content is no longer created for one destination. It needs to travel across platforms, formats, and audiences. What worked 6 months ago may no longer resonate today. All of this drives expectations higher. What's striking today is that we actually have more tools than ever before, but we are not always using them well enough for creative purposes. Instead of enabling creativity, they often add coordination work, more systems to update, more versions to align, and more processes to manage. And this is not just a theoretical observation. All of this complexity shows up very concretely in how teams work every day. One of the most visible symptoms is constant system switching. You see people jumping from one tool to another, from their scheduling software to budgeting, from documents to email, from a chat app to reporting. And although each switch may seem small, together they break focus, they slow down the momentum, and quietly consume hours every week. Another common issue is duplicated and conflicting information. The same data exists in multiple places. It's updated here, but it's already outdated there. And sooner or later, someone has to decide which version is correct. And that leads to something even more damaging: different versions of the truth. Without a single shared source of information, teams start working on assumptions. That means that misalignment creeps in, mistakes happen, and rework becomes the new normal. Manual handovers even make this worse. Information is copied, re-entered, and transferred by hand between systems and between teams. And every manual step introduces a delay and increases definitely the risk of error. At first glance, you might think this is mainly a management problem. And of course, part of it definitely is. But the real cost is paid elsewhere. It is in something which is much more valuable to the process. It's in the creative time. It's a creative tax on every project. What does the changing production world mean for day-to-day production reality? It shows up very concretely in how work is organized. Timelines are getting shorter, schedules are getting more compressed, deadlines that once felt exceptional have quietly become normal. At the same time, we observe that budgets are getting tighter by the day. There is less room for correction once production is underway. Projects also rarely result in a single deliverable anymore. One production now feeds multiple formats, multiple platforms, and multiple versions of the same content. And finally, teams are far more distributed. We see more freelancers, more remote collaborators, more co-productions across organizations, and even time zones. When you put all of this together, modern production is not just faster or bigger, it's structurally more complex. Before we go any further, I wanted to pause on this for a moment because the challenges we're describing today, they are definitely not unique to a few organizations. They are widely recognized across the industry. Many large consulting and research organizations have been pointing to the same patterns. What is actually changing? Across the industry, we see three fundamental shifts in how creative production is organized. The first shift is from many tools to connected environments. For a long time, we accepted that production meant juggling dozens of disconnected platforms. Scheduling happens in one place, budgeting in another place, and documents all scattered around on file systems and remote disks. That model is starting to break down. Modern teams need integrated ecosystems where information flows naturally without a constant duplication or context switching. The second shift is from data overload to meaningful insight. We are not short on data, we are actually drowning in it. But data on its own does not help teams make better decisions. What matters is turning raw data into actionable intelligence. Insight that arrives early enough to adjust course while creative choices are still possible. The third shift is from silos to shared understanding. Isolated departments create invisible barriers. Breaking down those walls doesn't reduce control. It creates transparency, alignment, and allows everyone to contribute to the same creative vision. Taken together, these three shifts point to a different way of working. A way of working where complexity is still there, but no longer gets in the way of creativity. When complexity increases, the natural reaction is to seek more control. That's a reaction that makes a lot of sense. But when people feel they're losing overview, they start to add layers. More checkpoints, more approval flows, more rules. It feels reassuring and gives a false idea of control. But in practice, it often leads to the opposite result. Instead of creating clarity, it creates bottlenecks. This is where we see that many organizations get stuck. And it's definitely not what a modern production needs. The goal is to reduce friction without losing control. That requires a totally different way of thinking. So if adding more layers is not the answer, what actually creates real efficiency? The answer is integration. True efficiency does not come from adding more tools, more processes, or more checkpoints. It comes from connecting what already matters. We often describe this as a connected production spine. Think of it as the backbone of a production. Just like a skeleton, it doesn't do any work itself, but it holds everything together. It creates a structure, and it allows the rest to move more freely. When the spine is strong and connected, teams gain clarity, speed, and creative confidence. The spine is built from 5 essential elements. First, the foundation: schedules, team capacity, and budget. As long as those live in separate worlds, teams are constantly reacting to the situation. The second one is creative inputs. These should not be scattered across documents and inboxes. When creative input is centralized, everyone works towards the same vision from the very first start to the finish. The third one is the human reality of work. Systems need to take into account for realistic workloads and focused time. Not just deadlines on a plan, but what teams can actually sustain without burning out. The fourth execution, and feedback. Real-time status updates and streamlined feedback loops keep everyone aligned without endless meetings or long email chains. That results in less chasing, less guessing, and definitely more confidence. And finally, integration within the wider ecosystem. No organization starts from scratch. Teams already use tools. And the goal is not to replace everything. The goal is to connect everything so there is one shared source of truth without forcing people to change everything at once. When these 5 elements come together, complexity doesn't disappear but becomes manageable. When production elements connect through a unified spine, the impact is immediate, and it doesn't stay confined to one team or one department. The first change is unification. Instead of juggling multiple calendars, plans, and partial overviews, teams see the full picture in one place. The second change is transparency. Everyone understands who is working on what, where a project stands, and what's coming next. That clarity removes a lot of noise and friction. The third change is protection. When logistics and coordination run smoothly in the background, they stop competing for attention. That creates space for what matters most. Creativity is no longer constantly interrupted by operational friction. And finally, work should become and will become more frictionless. Tasks move naturally from idea to execution to completion. To make this tangible, we will now walk through a typical production cycle from the perspective of a producer. Once again, not as a demo, but as a journey we take together. This is what an all-in-one production foundation actually looks like. At first glance, you can immediately see how all the elements of a production are connected and work closely together. Nothing exists in isolation. We are definitely not going to do a technical deep dive or walkthrough of this, and we're not going to show any feature or screen. We'll zoom in on a few familiar steps that exist in every production. That are the moments where producers and teams typically experience friction, uncertainty, or some loss of control. And we will show how an integrated platform covers those challenges as part of one connected flow. Visually, an all-in-one system can look complex, but complexity on screen does not mean complexity in use. In fact, the whole purpose of integration is to make work simpler and not harder. By bringing everything together, teams no longer need to translate information from one system to another. The system does that work for them naturally. So as we go through the next steps, I'd invite you to focus less on individual components and more on the flow. The flow, how information moves, how decisions are supported, and how friction quietly disappears. Let's move on to that journey together. Let's at the very beginning of a production. Even long before cameras roll, even long before crews are booked, everything starts with an idea. In the early pre-pitch phase, the goal is to turn that idea into something concrete and pitch ready and get it green-lighted. And already at this stage, a first sense of scope matters. You have rough budget ranges, format decisions, episode lengths are defined, and when this early work lives in one connected environment, creative intent and practical constraints stay aligned from the start. And that alignment becomes even more important once the project moves further. This is where integrated platforms such as Genius support the process quietly in the background. By keeping scripts, budget, planning, and financial context connected, the foundation of the production is solid before execution even begins. And that makes everything that follows faster, calmer, and more creative. So once the project is greenlit, everything starts to move faster. And one of the first critical milestones is managing the scripts, to turn creative development into a stable foundation that production can actually build on. Drafts are written, reviewed, rewritten, and revised. At the same time, notes start coming in from multiple directions. Each note may seem small on its own, but together they shape what can and cannot be produced. This is where things often become fragile. Multiple versions circulate, feedback gets fragmented, and changes in scripts can quietly impact the process. Everyone, everyone needs to work from the same version with a clear understanding of what is approved and what is not. When scripts are managed inside an integrated environment, that alignment becomes a lot easier. When production enters the prep phase, in a fragmented environment, this phase is where complexity often explodes. Information moves slowly or even not, decisions are based on partial insight, and surprises appear late in the process. In an integrated environment, prep becomes much more controlled. Changes are visible immediately, and the teams stay aligned without endless coordination and talks. Platforms such as Genius support this phase by bringing information together in one workflow. And that doesn't remove complexity, but it ensures complexity is managed before the first day of shooting. Once shooting starts, everything accelerates. At the same time, daily production management never stops. Problems solved problems are solved as they arrive and as they arise because they always will and always do. The challenge during shooting is not avoiding surprises, it's responding to them without losing control. Because once the cameras roll, time is expensive and mistakes compound quickly. This is also where information flows become critical. In an integrated environment, shooting becomes far more manageable because changes are reflected immediately and teams know where they stand and what has been delivered and what still lies ahead in real time. Going to the wrap, and once the shooting wraps, the focus shifts to post production. Throughout post production, the producer's role remains critical. He has to keep the posts on schedule, he has to manage the costs, and he has to make sure deliverables match what was agreed upon. In an integrated environment, post production does not operate in isolation. Everything remains connected to the original plan. That continuity reduces last minute stress and avoids costly surprises right before delivery. There's one concern that almost always comes up when we talk about integrated production platforms. People are reluctant to change, that's a fact. And that's completely understandable. Teams have tools they trust. The idea of having to give up all of that often increases resistance before the conversation even really starts. The important thing to understand is this: integration does not mean replacement. In fact, modern production environments can only function properly because they integrate with other systems. The role of an integrated production foundation is not to compete with them, it is to connect them, to make sure information flows between systems without manual reentry, without duplication, and without confusion about which version is correct. In this way, teams can keep using the tools they trust while gaining something new: a single shared operational view, one source of the truth. Platforms such as Genius are designed with this reality in mind: evolution, not revolution, not replacement. Okay, everything we've discussed so far ultimately leads to one question: can you trust the information you're making decisions on? We've talked a lot today about data driven decisions, but data only becomes useful when it is consistent, complete, reliable, and up to date. In fragmented environments, reporting often comes too late in the process, or it tells different stories depending on which system you look at. That's when surprises appear. In an integrated environment, reporting works very differently because all information comes from one shared foundation. There is one source of truth. That means reports are not reconciliations after the fact. They are live insights into where you stand and where you're heading. Okay, now that we looked at that, the same principle actually applies to security. Production data is not just operational data, but valuable intellectual property. They are creative capital. Protecting that information is not just an IT concern. It is a business and a creative responsibility. That's why integrated platforms use secure file storage, centralized databases, and controlled access as part of their foundation. Platforms such as Genius, they are all built with this dual responsibility in mind. As we come to a close, I want to bring everything back to a few core outcomes. First, the ability to adapt quickly. Modern production environments change constantly. The goal is not to react after the facts every time. It's to work with systems that are flexible by design and that absorb change without exhausting teams. Second, smooth collaboration. Creativity rarely lives inside one department or one location. We have to break down those silos. When walls disappear between teams, collaboration becomes natural. Shared visibility creates alignment. The third point is the ability to stay in control. It means leaders can trust their teams, can stay informed, and make decisions with confidence. And finally, the most important outcome of all, protecting your creative capital by reducing administrative burden, coordination overhead, and constant realignment. Talented people can focus again on the work that inspired them to join your team in the first place. If you'd like to explore how this thinking applies to your own production environment, we'd be very happy to continue this conversation. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this session useful and interesting. This was the first webinar we're hosting at Genius, and it's also the first in a series. Our intention is to organize these kind of sessions on a regular basis. Then thanks for participating, and see you next time on our next webinar, which will be announced shortly.